My daughter-in-law threw my old wooden box into the trash and said, "You don't need dead memories cluttering up our house." She didn't know the hidden trust papers were inside. I had just come back from the pharmacy with a paper bag of blood pressure pills in one hand and a half-gallon of milk in the other, when I saw it beside the garbage bins at the end of the driveway. The box was walnut, dark with age, the brass latch scratched from my husband Thomas's fingers opening and closing it over the years. It had sat on the top shelf of my bedroom closet since the winter he passed, wrapped in an old white pillowcase because I could not bear to see it every morning and remember the way his hands trembled when he gave it to me. Now it was sitting on the cold concrete next to coffee grounds, torn envelopes, and a broken lamp Madison had decided was too ugly for her taste. For a moment I simply stood there, the pharmacy bag pressed against my coat, watching a thin line of rain collect on the lid. I was 72 years old, but in that second I felt like a little girl who had found something precious left out in the weather. Madison stood on the front porch in her cream sweater and polished boots, arms folded like she had been waiting for me to notice. "I started clearing out the storage closet," she called. "Honestly, Eleanor, half of that stuff should have been gone years ago." Behind her, my son Andrew hovered in the doorway with one hand on the frame, looking at the ground instead of at me. He had his father's shoulders, his father's gray eyes, and none of his father's courage in that moment. I set the milk on the hood of my car and walked to the bins. Slowly, carefully. I did not want Madison to see my hands shake. "That box was mine," I said. Madison gave a small laugh, the kind people use when they want cruelty to sound like common sense. "It was full of old paper and dust. You keep acting like this house is a museum. We can't move forward if every corner is packed with grief. Our house," she had started calling it. "Not my house. Not your mother's house. Our house." She had been married to Andrew for 9 years, and somewhere in those 9 years she had learned to speak as if Thomas and I had only been temporary caretakers, as if 48 years of marriage, mortgage payments, Thanksgiving dinners, scraped knees, Christmas mornings, and quiet evenings on the porch could be folded up and tossed away before trash pickup. I bent down and lifted the box. The wood was damp on one side, but the latch was still closed. I brushed coffee grounds from the lid with my sleeve. Andrew finally spoke, soft and useless. "Mom, Madison's just trying to help. There's too much for you to manage." I looked at him then. Really looked. This was the same boy who used to hide behind my apron when thunderstorms shook the windows. The same boy Thomas carried on his shoulders through the county fair, sticky with cotton candy and laughing into the summer air. Now he stood behind his wife while she threw away the last things his father had touched. I opened the latch. Inside were old birthday cards, a faded photograph of Thomas beside our first Buick, a silver tie clip, and beneath all of it, a yellow envelope sealed in clear plastic. The rain had not reached it. Across the front, in Thomas's careful handwriting, were the words, "For Eleanor, when they forget who this house belongs to." The whole driveway seemed to go quiet. Even Madison stopped smiling. I slid the envelope free and held it against my chest. I did not know yet what every page inside would mean, not fully. I only knew Thomas had written those words for a day exactly like this one. A day when someone would mistake my silence for weakness. A day when my own son would stand aside. A day when Madison would think she had thrown away my past, never realizing she had just uncovered her future. I closed the box, looked up at my daughter-in-law and said, "You should have asked what was inside." 48 hours before I found that box beside the garbage bins, Madison had already begun removing me from my own home in small, careful ways. It started with the curtains in the front room. They were pale blue, faded at the edges, but Thomas had chosen them with me on a Saturday morning at a little store outside Columbus, back when we still argued over paint samples and stopped for pie on the way home. I came downstairs after breakfast and found Madison standing on a step stool, pulling them down like they were old sheets in a motel. "These make the room look tired," she said without turning around. Andrew was by the fireplace, wrapping our wedding photograph in newspaper. Not his wedding photograph. Ours. Mine and Thomas's. The one where Thomas was 24, nervous, handsome, and holding my hand like he had just been given the whole world. I stood in the doorway with my coffee cooling in my hand and watched my son tape the newspaper around our faces. "Where are you putting that?" I asked. Andrew looked uncomfortable, but Madison answered for him. "Just downstairs for now. We are trying to open up the space. Buyers like clean walls. Buyers. She said it so casually that for a second I wondered whether I had missed an entire conversation about selling the house I still owned, slept in, paid insurance on, and woke up inside every morning. There are no buyers, I said. Madison stepped down, brushed dust from her palms, and smiled at me the way a nurse might smile at a difficult patient. Not yet, Eleanor. But we should be realistic. That was one of her favorite words. Realistic. Practical. Sensible. Words that sounded adult and kind until you realized they were being used to shrink your life down to whatever size was convenient for someone else. By lunch, my rocking chair had been moved from the sunroom to the basement landing. By dinner, Thomas's fishing rods were gone from the garage wall. By the next morning, the cedar chest at the foot of my bed had been emptied into cardboard boxes labeled donation, storage, and uncertain. I found my church hat, my mother's table runner, and Thomas's old wool cardigan in the donation box. The cardigan still carried the faint smell of cedar and aftershave. I held it against my face when no one was looking. Madison caught me anyway. You cannot keep everything just because it belonged to him, she said from the hallway. I folded the cardigan slowly. I am not keeping everything. It feels like you are. Andrew appeared behind her, holding 2 cups of coffee he had not made for me. Mom, Madison is only trying to help get things under control. Under control. As if grief were clutter. As if memory were a leak in the ceiling. As if I had become one more household problem his wife had decided to fix. I wanted to ask him when he had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a task. But I did not. I had learned over the past year that questions could be ignored more easily than silence. So I watched. I watched Madison move through my rooms with a clipboard. I watched her open drawers that had not belonged to her. I watched her pause too long near the locked file cabinet in Thomas's study. I watched her ask Andrew where his father kept the important documents, then laugh when he said he did not know. That laugh stayed with me. It was not amused. It was impatient. That afternoon, she brought home glossy brochures from a senior residence 38 miles away. She placed them on my kitchen table while I was peeling carrots for stew. The cover showed a smiling white-haired woman holding a mug beside a window that looked out on a garden too perfect to be real. Just look at it, Madison said. No pressure. But there was pressure in the way she tapped the brochure with one manicured finger. There was pressure in the way Andrew stood behind her, silent again. There was pressure in the fact that my name had already been written on a sticky note attached to the front. Eleanor relocation options. Not Eleanor's choices. Not Mom's future. Relocation options. I set the peeler down and wiped my hands on a dish towel. The stew pot simmered behind me. The house smelled like carrots, onions, and bay leaves, the same smell that used to bring Thomas into the kitchen pretending he needed a glass of water, just so he could steal a kiss from my cheek. Madison slid the brochure closer. This place has activities, transportation, meals, everything you need. I looked at the bright fake garden on the cover. Everything except my husband's garden. Everything except my neighbor's. Everything except the kitchen where I raised my son. Andrew looked down into his coffee. Madison's smile thinned. Sometimes holding on is not healthy. I picked up the brochure, folded it once, and placed it beside the salt shaker. Sometimes pushing is not helping. She did not answer right away. She only looked past me toward the hallway, toward the stairs, toward the room she had already begun to claim in her mind. That was when I understood something I had been avoiding for months. Madison was not preparing the house for the future. She was preparing the house for a future without me in it. The dinner happened the next evening, although Madison never called it a dinner until people began arriving. All afternoon she moved through my kitchen as if she had lived there longer than I had, opening cabinets, replacing my serving bowls with her white ceramic ones, setting out square plates I had never liked because food looked lonely on them. She told me to rest in the living room while she handled everything. Rest. Another soft word that really meant step aside. I sat in Thomas's chair near the window and listened to her give instructions to Andrew in a low, efficient voice. Put the brochures on the sideboard. Make sure your mother has a seat near the end. Do not bring up the taxes until after dessert. I folded my hands in my lap and watched the maple tree outside move gently in the late October wind. Thomas had planted that tree the year Andrew was born. He said every house needed something that would outlive its worst seasons. By 6 o'clock, Andrew's cousin Mark and his wife Denise had arrived, followed by Madison's friend Paige, who worked in real estate and wore a navy blazer sharp enough to make the whole evening feel like a business meeting. Nobody had told me Paige was coming. Nobody asked whether I wanted strangers at my table, while my future was being discussed. Madison greeted everyone with bright warmth, touching arms, taking coats, pouring iced tea into tall glasses. To anyone watching, she would have looked like the generous daughter-in-law trying to support an aging widow. That was one of her gifts. She knew how to make control look like kindness. We sat at the dining room table Thomas had refinished by hand 30 years earlier. I could still see the small mark near my plate where Andrew had pressed a fork into the wood when he was 5. Madison had covered most of the table with a linen runner and a centerpiece of white pumpkins, but I knew where every scar was. Some things can be hidden without disappearing. Dinner began with polite talk about gas prices, school fundraisers, and the early frost coming in from the north. I answered when spoken to. I cut my chicken into small pieces. I watched Andrew avoid my eyes. After dessert, Madison cleared her throat and placed a cream-colored folder beside my plate. My name was on the front in her handwriting. Eleanor Relocation Plan. The room went quiet in that quick, embarrassed way people go quiet when they know something unkind is about to be dressed up as concern. Madison smiled. We all love you, Eleanor. That is why we think it is time to have a practical conversation. I looked at the folder. I did not touch it. A conversation usually starts before the decision is made. Mark shifted in his chair. Denise looked down at her napkin. Paige opened her laptop. Andrew rubbed his thumb along the edge of his glass, the same nervous habit he had as a boy when he knew he had disappointed me. Madison kept smiling. No one is deciding for you. We are presenting options. She nodded to Paige, who turned the laptop so I could see a slideshow of my own house. My front porch. My kitchen. My bedroom window from the outside. I felt something inside me go very still. Not loud. Not hot. Still. Madison had let a realtor photograph my home without asking me. The place where Thomas had taken his last morning coffee. The place where I had stood barefoot at midnight when Andrew had fevers. The place where I still said goodnight to my husband's photograph because the habit comforted me more than sleep did. Paige clicked to the next image and began talking about market timing, buyer demand, and how homes in our neighborhood were moving quickly if properly staged. Properly staged meant stripped of memory. Madison leaned toward me. You would not have to worry about maintenance anymore. No more gutters, no more snow shoveling, no more property tax stress. Andrew and I can handle the transition. And where would I go? I asked. She slid the senior residence brochure across the table again. We found a lovely place less than 40 miles away. It has a dining room, exercise classes, shuttle service to doctors, even a little library. A little library. I had a wall of books Thomas built for me after Andrew left for college because he said the house sounded too quiet and I needed company that did not require cooking. I looked at my son. Is this what you want? Andrew swallowed. Mom, I think it makes sense. The words landed softly, which somehow made them worse. Madison reached over and patted his hand, rewarding him like a child who had recited his lines correctly. Then she turned back to me. You have to understand, Eleanor, at your age, independence can become a burden on everyone. No one moved. Even Paige stopped touching her keyboard. I stared at Madison, and in that instant, every small insult from the past year arranged itself neatly in my mind. The moved chair. The boxed photographs. The questions about documents. The brochures. The realtor. This was not concern. This was a campaign. I picked up the folder at last, opened it, and saw a printed calendar with a date circled in red exactly 30 days away. Move out target. I closed the folder gently. The sound was small, but everyone heard it. I see, I said. Madison exhaled as if she had one. I knew you would come around. I looked toward the hallway, toward the closet upstairs where Thomas's walnut box still waited in the dark. At that moment, I did not yet know what was hidden beneath the cards and photographs. But I knew my husband. I knew the way he prepared for winter before the first leaf fell. I knew the way he checked every lock twice, saved every receipt, read every line before signing his name. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that Thomas had not left me in a house where Madison could simply erase me with a folder and a smile. That night, after everyone left and Madison's white ceramic plates were stacked in my sink like evidence of a dinner I had not agreed to host, I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. I did not turn on the lamp. The house was quiet except for the old furnace clicking on beneath the floorboards and the faint sound of Andrew and Madison speaking in the guest room down the hall. Their voices were low, too low for words, but not too low for meaning. Madison sounded pleased. Andrew sounded tired. I looked toward the closet. Behind the sliding door on the top shelf, the walnut box waited under its white pillowcase. I had avoided opening it for nearly 2 years because grief has its own kind of weather, and some days even touching the past feels like stepping into a storm without a coat. But after that dinner, after seeing a move-out date printed in red like my life was a project with a deadline, I could not keep pretending the box was only memory. Thomas had been ill during his final winter, but he had never been careless. Even when his hand shook holding a coffee mug, his mind stayed steady. He still balanced the checkbook every Friday. He still circled renewal dates on the calendar. He still asked me whether the porch light was working before I went to bed, as if darkness itself was something he could protect me from by planning ahead. I remembered the afternoon he gave me the box. Snow was falling over the backyard, soft and clean, covering the garden beds he had already mulched for spring. He was sitting in his recliner with a blanket over his knees, wearing the blue flannel shirt Andrew had given him for Christmas. I had brought him chicken soup he barely touched. He kept looking toward the hallway, listening, making sure we were alone. Then he reached beside the chair and lifted the walnut box into his lap. "Ellie," he said, using the name only he used, "there may come a day when people speak gently while trying to take something from you." I had told him not to talk that way. I told him Andrew loved me. I told him Madison was difficult sometimes, but she was family. Thomas smiled then, not because he agreed, but because he loved me too much to argue with hope. "Andrew has a good heart," he said. "But a good heart without a backbone can be led straight into doing wrong." I remember how sharply those words landed, and how quickly I pushed them away. No. Mother wants to imagine her child standing on the wrong side of her pain. Thomas tapped the lid of the box with 2 thin fingers. "The people who love you will never need this. The people who do not will expose themselves." I thought he meant letters. Maybe insurance papers. Maybe instructions about the cemetery plot, or the small savings account we kept for emergencies. I did not ask. He looked so tired, and I was still foolish enough to believe time would give us another chance for every conversation we were not ready to have. A week later he was gone. The box went into the closet. The house filled with flowers, casseroles, folded sympathy cards, and the strange polite voices people use around widows, as if grief might spill if spoken to too loudly. Madison was helpful at first. Very helpful. She organized the food, answered calls, made lists, stood beside Andrew with one hand on his back. I thanked her more than once. I even felt guilty for Thomas's warning. But after the funeral, her help changed shape. She began asking where documents were kept. She wanted to know whether Thomas had updated the deed. She asked whether I had considered simplifying my finances. She offered to take over bills, passwords, appointments, decisions. Each offer arrived wrapped in concern. Each one made my world a little smaller. I did not see it clearly then. Or maybe I saw it and looked away. It is easier to forgive a sharp word than to admit someone is studying your weakness. Sitting in the dark now, I remembered another thing Thomas had said. He had taken my hand in both of his and turned my wedding ring gently around my finger, a habit he had when he was thinking. "Promise me you will not sign anything because someone makes you feel tired." I had laughed softly through tears and told him I was not helpless. He said, "I know. But they may forget." Down the hall Madison laughed at something. A small satisfied laugh. I stood up. My knees ached, and the room tilted for a second the way it sometimes did when I rose too quickly, but I steadied myself against the dresser. I opened the closet and reached for the box. The pillowcase was dusty. The walnut underneath was smooth and cold. I carried it to the bed and sat with it in my lap. For a long moment, I only rested my palms on the lid. I could almost feel Thomas there, not as a ghost, not as a miracle, but as the memory of a man who had known me before the world started calling me old. Then I opened it. The cards were on top, tied with blue ribbon. Beneath them was the photograph of our first Buick, the silver tie clip, and the sealed yellow envelope I had ignored for 2 years because I was afraid of what final instructions might feel like. I turned it over. For Eleanor, when they forget who this house belongs to. My breath caught, but I did not cry. I had cried enough into pillows. I had cried in the laundry room, in the shower, in the car outside the grocery store. That night, I only slid my finger under the edge of the plastic sleeve and pulled the envelope free. The paper inside was thick. Legal paper. Folded twice. At the top was the letterhead of Bennett and Cole, attorneys at law. Under it, in bold letters, were the words Whitaker Family Irrevocable Trust. I read the first page once, then again, then a third time slower. The house was not Andrew's. It was not Madison's. It was not available for Paige to stage, photograph, or sell. Thomas had placed it in trust with lifetime residential rights reserved for me alone. No child, spouse of a child, creditor, or outside party could remove me, pressure me to vacate, or force sale while I was living incompetent. My hands became very still on the page. There was more. Much more. But one sentence seemed to rise from the paper and fill the room. Any attempt to coerce, displace, manipulate, or financially pressure Eleanor Whitaker shall trigger immediate suspension of beneficiary privileges pending legal review. I sat there in the dark with the document in my lap while the furnace hummed below me. For the first time in months, the house did not feel like it was shrinking around me. It felt like Thomas had built walls inside the walls. Quiet ones. Legal ones. Stronger than Madison's smile. By morning, the first light came through the bedroom curtains in thin gray lines, and I was still awake with the trust papers spread across the quilt. I had read every page slowly, the way Thomas used to read appliance warranties and insurance forms at the kitchen table with a pencil tucked behind his ear. I did not understand every legal phrase, but I understood enough. The house was protected. My right to live there was protected. Even the investment account Thomas had built quietly over decades was protected from anyone who tried to force me into giving up control. At 7:15, while Madison was still asleep and Andrew was downstairs making coffee, I folded the papers back into the envelope, placed them inside my purse, and called Harold Bennett. His office number was still in the old address book beside the phone in Thomas's study. I expected a receptionist. Instead, after 2 rings, a familiar older voice said, "Bennett and Cole." I had not spoken to him since the funeral, but he knew me immediately. "Eleanor," he said, and there was something in his tone that made my throat tighten. Not surprise. Concern. "I found the envelope," I told him. There was a pause. Then the soft sound of a chair moving. "Are you alone?" I looked toward the hallway. Andrew's coffee mug tapped against the counter downstairs. Madison's door was closed. For the moment. "Then listen carefully," he said. "Do not sign anything. Do not agree to move anywhere. Do not give anyone access to the original documents. Bring them to my office as soon as you safely can." Safely. It was a strange word to hear about paperwork, but I understood what he meant. Not danger in the dramatic way people imagine. Something quieter. Pressure. Confusion. Exhaustion. The kind of thing that wears down an older woman until she signs away a life just to make the room stop arguing. I told Andrew I had a dentist appointment in town. He looked relieved, probably because it meant one less uncomfortable conversation before breakfast. Madison appeared at the top of the stairs in a silk robe, holding her phone, her hair pinned neatly even before coffee. "You are going out?" she asked. "Just an appointment," I said, buttoning my coat. Her eyes moved to my purse. For the first time, I noticed how often she looked at what I carried. "Do you want me to drive you?" "No, thank you. At your age, icy sidewalks can be tricky." It was 46 degrees outside. No ice. Not even frost. "I will manage." I drove the 12 miles to downtown Westerville with both hands on the wheel, and the envelope tucked under my purse on the passenger seat. The town looked the same as it always had in late October. Pumpkins outside the bakery. Flags moving gently in front of the courthouse. A school bus stopping near the corner where Thomas once bought me roses from a sidewalk vendor because it was Tuesday, and he said Tuesday deserved flowers too. Bennett and Cole was on the second floor of a brick building above a title company. Harold Bennett met me in the lobby himself. He was thinner than I remembered, his hair almost completely white now, but his eyes were sharp behind his glasses. He took both my hands in his and said, "Thomas hoped you would never need this." That was when I nearly cried. Not because I was afraid. Because someone had finally said Thomas's name like he still mattered in the room. In his office, Harold made photocopies of the papers and placed the originals in a flat brown file. He read through the trust with me, line by line, translating the cold legal language into plain English. The house could not be sold while I was living there unless I chose to sell it. Andrew had no authority over the property. Madison had none at all. The trustee powers Thomas had reserved for me were still active, and if I became ill someday, the successor trustee was not Andrew. It was Harold first, then Thomas's sister Clara. I stared at him. "Andrew does not know?" Harold shook his head. "Thomas decided your son should inherit only if he respected the boundaries set around you. He loved Andrew, but he was not blind." The words hurt, but they also settled something inside me. Thomas had seen what I refused to see. Harold turned to another page and tapped a paragraph with his pen. "This is the protection clause. Any attempt by a beneficiary or a beneficiary's spouse to coerce you, pressure you to vacate, interfere with your personal documents, or financially manipulate trust assets triggers review. During review, distributions can be frozen." "Madison threw the box outside yesterday," I said. "She told me I did not need dead memories cluttering the house." Harold's face did not change much, but his jaw tightened. "Do you have proof?" I opened my purse and took out my phone. I had taken one photograph in the driveway without thinking, almost out of habit, the box beside the garbage bin, the lid damp, the trash bags behind it. Then I showed him the folder from dinner, the calendar marked Move Out Target, the brochure with my name on the sticky note. He looked at each piece quietly. "Eleanor," he said at last, "your husband did not leave them a fortune. He left them a test. They are failing it." I sat very still. Outside his window, cars passed on State Street, ordinary people on ordinary errands, while my whole understanding of my family shifted in a silent office above a title company. Harold advised me not to confront Madison yet. He told me to save every message, keep every voicemail, write down dates, and allow him to prepare formal notice if needed. "People like this often reveal more when they believe they are winning," he said. I thought of Madison smiling over dessert while Paige displayed photographs of my home. I thought of Andrew saying it made sense. I thought of Thomas's handwriting on the envelope. When I left Harold's office, the brown file was locked in his cabinet, the copies were in my purse, and my hands were steady for the first time in days. Madison's car was in the driveway when I got home. She was waiting in the kitchen, one hip against the counter, her phone in her hand. "That was a long dentist appointment," she said. I hung my coat on the hook Thomas had installed crookedly 40 years ago. I had never let him fix it. "They were thorough," I said. Madison studied my face, searching for fear, confusion, surrender. I gave her none of it. I only walked to the stove, filled the kettle, and set it to boil. Behind me, she said, "We should talk about the move-out timeline." I placed one teacup on the counter. "Just one." "Not today," I said. The kettle began to hum. Madison did not know it yet, but the timeline had already changed. It no longer belonged to her. For the next 3 days, I became very quiet. Not the helpless kind of quiet Madison had expected from me. Not the tired silence of a woman being guided toward a decision she did not want. This was different. This was the silence Thomas used to have when he measured twice before cutting a piece of wood. Careful. Patient. Final. I stopped arguing about the brochures. I stopped asking Andrew why he would not look at me when Madison spoke. I stopped defending the photographs she removed from the walls. Instead, I watched and I saved everything. When Madison texted me a link to the senior residence and wrote, "This would be easier if you cooperated," I did not answer. I took a screenshot. When Andrew left a voicemail saying, "Mom, please do not make this harder than it has to be. Madison is only thinking about what is best for everyone," I saved it twice, once on my phone and once on the little recorder Harold Bennett told me how to use. When Madison placed another folder on the kitchen island labeled 30-day transition checklist, I did not push it back at her. I waited until she went upstairs, then photographed every page under the warm yellow light above the sink. There were boxes beside my name. Pack personal items. Arrange transportation. Sign residence application. Review property preparation schedule. The last line made me sit down. Remove emotionally sensitive items before valuation. Emotionally sensitive items. Thomas's military flag from the mantel. My mother's china cabinet. Andrew's baby shoes in the hallway drawer. Our anniversary clock. Our life had been reduced to objects that might distract a buyer from seeing square footage. On Thursday morning, Madison brought in 2 large plastic storage tubs and set them near the staircase. For whatever you want to keep, she said. 2 tubs. 72 years of living. 48 years of marriage. 1 child raised. 1 husband buried. 1 house held together through layoffs, snowstorms, medical bills, and every ordinary mercy that makes a family real. 2 tubs. I looked at them for a long time. Madison mistook my stillness for defeat. It helps to have limits, she added. Otherwise people get sentimental and freeze. I picked up the lid of 1 tub and ran my fingers along the edge. Yes, I said. Limits can be useful. She smiled because she thought I meant mine. I meant hers. That afternoon, I began keeping a notebook in the drawer of Thomas's desk. I wrote dates, times, exact phrases. October 23rd, Madison said I had 30 days to be reasonable. October 24th, Andrew said selling would solve everyone's stress. October 25th, Madison asked whether I still had access to Thomas's old bank statements. I wrote in neat blue ink, the way I used to write grocery lists when Andrew was small. Milk, bread, eggs, evidence. I called Clara, Thomas's sister, from the phone in the laundry room because Madison had begun appearing whenever I used my cell phone for too long. Clara was 76, widowed twice, and sharper than a winter wind off Lake Erie. She answered on the first ring. Ellie, I was wondering when you would call. Those words told me Thomas had told her more than he had told me. I closed the laundry room door and leaned against the dryer while it hummed. Did you know about the trust? Some, she said. Not the details. Tommy said Harold would handle that if the day came. Tommy. No one but Clara still called him that. I looked at the basket of towels on the floor, folded so neatly it made me sad. The day came. Clara did not gasp. She did not ask foolish questions. She only said, then do not warn them too early. I smiled for the first time since the dinner. A small smile. Private. Harold said the same thing. Good. Let them show who they are while they think nobody is taking notes. After we hung up, I stood there listening to the dryer turn. There was comfort in the sound. Ordinary things continued even when people tried to rearrange your life behind your back. Towels still dried. Kettles still boiled. Mail still slid through the slot. I began to understand that power did not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrived as a saved voicemail, a dated note, a sealed envelope copied and locked away in an attorney's cabinet. That evening, Madison announced she had invited Paige back on Sunday for a more serious discussion about listing strategy. She said it while stirring her tea at my kitchen table, as if she were telling me the weather forecast. Andrew sat across from her, shoulders rounded, face pale with the strain of choosing weakness over love one more time. We need to keep momentum, Madison said. The market will not wait forever. I buttered a piece of toast with slow, even strokes. No, I said. It usually does not. Andrew looked at me, surprised by my calm. Madison narrowed her eyes. So you agree we should talk Sunday? Sunday is fine. Her smile returned, bright and satisfied. I am glad you are finally being reasonable. I placed the knife beside my plate. The soft clink sounded louder than it should have. I have been reasonable this entire time. She did not hear the difference. People like Madison rarely hear a door closing if it does not slam. Later, when the house was dark, I took the walnut box from my closet and placed it on Thomas's desk. I did not hide it this time. I set it beneath the green banker's lamp, next to his old fountain pen and the photograph of us at Niagara Falls in 1982, both of us squinting into the mist, young enough to think the future would always be generous. I opened my notebook and added one more line. October 26th, Madison scheduled Sunday dinner to pressure me into selling the house. Then I closed the notebook, laid my palm flat on the cover and whispered, "I am ready now, Tom." The house creaked softly around me, settling into the cold. For months I had felt like a guest waiting to be asked to leave. That night, for the first time, I remembered the truth. I was not waiting in Madison's house. She was standing in mine. Sunday arrived with a hard blue sky and a wind that pushed dry leaves across the driveway in restless little circles. Madison treated the day like a closing appointment. By noon, she had cleared the dining room table, polished the silver candlesticks, and placed Paige's business cards beside every plate as if my home had already become a product. She wore a charcoal dress and pearl earrings, the kind of outfit meant to look respectful while leaving no room for argument. Andrew wore a pressed shirt I knew Madison had chosen because the collar sat too stiffly against his neck. He kept checking the clock above the stove. I made vegetable soup and cornbread because Thomas had always said serious conversations needed simple food. Madison did not like that. She had brought a tray of tiny sandwiches from a market across town and said soup felt too casual for such an important discussion. I set the pot on the stove anyway. "People can eat what they prefer," I said. She looked at me for 1 second too long, then smiled. "Of course." Paige arrived at 5:30 with her laptop bag, a folder of glossy printouts, and the confident expression of someone who believed the hardest part was already done. Mark and Denise came too, invited by Madison again, probably to make the room feel like a family consensus instead of a planned surrender. Clara was not there. Harold was not there. Not yet. I had spoken to both of them that morning from Thomas's study with the door closed. Harold told me to let Madison speak first. Clara told me not to rescue Andrew from the discomfort he had earned. So I sat at the table in my navy cardigan, the walnut box resting on the sideboard behind me where everyone could see it if they bothered to look. Madison noticed it immediately. Her eyes flicked toward it, then back to me. A tiny crack in her confidence. Dinner was polite in the way bad weather is polite before the first branch falls. Paige praised the neighborhood. Denise said the cornbread was wonderful. Mark asked Andrew about work. Madison answered half of the questions meant for him. I ate slowly. I listened. After the plates were cleared, Madison folded her hands on the table and gave the room her practiced soft smile. "Thank you all for being here. This is not easy, but families have to make responsible decisions together." I noticed the word together. She used it whenever she wanted other people to carry the weight of what she had already decided. Paige opened her laptop. The screen lit her face pale blue. Madison continued. "Eleanor has had some time to think, and I believe we are all moving toward the same conclusion." I set my spoon down. "Are we?" Andrew looked at me quickly, then away. Madison gave a small laugh. "Well, yes. I mean, we have discussed the transition." "You discussed it," I said. "You printed it. You photographed it. You scheduled it. I do not remember agreeing to it." A silence opened around the table. Madison's smile held, but only at the edges. "Eleanor, nobody is trying to force you." "Then what are we doing here?" Paige shifted in her chair. Mark stared at his water glass. Madison leaned forward, lowering her voice as though speaking gently would make the words less sharp. "We are helping you accept reality. This house is too much. The maintenance alone is becoming irresponsible. Andrew is worried. I am worried. We cannot all keep putting our lives on hold because you are attached to rooms and furniture." There it was. Not safety. Not love. Burden. She had dressed it up for days, but finally the plain shape showed through. I looked at Andrew. "Is that what I am doing? Putting your life on hold?" His face tightened. "Mom, I just want things to be easier." "For whom?" He had no answer. Madison stepped in before the silence could turn against her. "For everyone. That is the point. Paige has already prepared a preliminary listing plan, and if we move quickly, we could have the house ready for valuation within 2 weeks. Eleanor can begin sorting her personal items immediately. The residence has an opening next month, but they cannot hold it forever." "How generous of them," I said. Madison ignored that. She slid a document toward me with a pen placed neatly on top. "This is not a sale agreement. It is just permission for Paige to begin the process formally. A first step." I looked at the pen. Black ink. Gold clip. Not mine. Not Thomas's. I could feel every person at the table watching my hand. Madison expected trembling. Tears maybe. A weary signature. The old woman finally being reasonable. Instead, I leaned back in my chair. Before I sign anything, I have one question. Madison's expression brightened, thinking I had entered her script at last. Of course. I turned to Paige. When you photographed my home, who gave you permission? Paige blinked. I understood the family was in agreement. That is not what I asked. Her cheeks colored. Madison's voice sharpened just a little. Eleanor, that is unnecessary. I looked back at her. So is photographing a widow's bedroom window without her consent. Denise drew in a quiet breath. Andrew looked startled, as if the fact itself had only now become visible to him. Madison placed both palms on the table. This is exactly why we need help. You are becoming suspicious of people who are trying to support you. Support does not usually come with a move-out target. Her eyes flashed. Just once. Then she reached into her folder and pulled out the printed calendar, the one with the red circle. Fine. Let us stop pretending. You have 30 days to decide where you are going, Eleanor. This cannot continue. The room went completely still. The words hung over Thomas's table, harsh and useful. I let them stay there long enough for everyone to hear what she had finally said. Then I stood, walked to the sideboard, and placed one hand on the walnut box. Madison watched me as if the box had started breathing. I opened the lid. The yellow envelope was not inside anymore, but she did not know that. What I removed was a copy. Clean, crisp, waiting. I set it on the table in front of me. Madison stared at the letterhead. Bennett and Cole, attorneys at law. Her face changed before she could stop it. Andrew whispered, Mom, what is that? I looked at my son, then at his wife, then at the realtor who had come to sell a house nobody at that table had the right to sell. That, I said, is the reason this conversation is over. For a few seconds no one spoke. The copy of the trust sat on the table between the soup bowls and Paige's glossy market report, and somehow the legal paper looked more alive than anything else in the room. Madison stared at the letterhead as if it had insulted her personally. Andrew leaned forward, his face pale, his eyes moving from my hands to the pages and back again. Paige closed her laptop halfway, slowly enough not to draw attention, but I saw the movement. People always begin distancing themselves when a room changes direction. What is this? Madison asked. Her voice was still. Calm, but the calm had lost its polish. I placed my palm flat on the document. It is Thomas's trust. Andrew blinked. Dad had a trust? Yes. Why did I not know? That question hurt more than I expected. Not because he asked it, but because he believed ignorance gave him innocence. I looked at him across the table where he had once sat with cereal on his pajamas and a toy truck beside his bowl. Because your father hoped you would never need to be reminded to protect your mother. Madison gave a sharp little breath. This is ridiculous. A trust does not mean you can just refuse help from your family. No, I said. But it does mean this house cannot be sold by you, Andrew, Paige, or anyone else at this table. Paige opened her mouth, then closed it. Madison turned to her. That cannot be right. Paige looked at the first page from where she sat, careful not to touch it. I am not an attorney. It was the most honest thing she had said all evening. Madison's cheeks flushed. Andrew is Thomas's son. He is the heir. A beneficiary, I said. Not an owner. Not a trustee. Not my landlord. Andrew whispered. Mom. I heard shame in it. Maybe fear. Maybe both. But I had learned not to soften truth simply because my son was uncomfortable hearing it. Before Madison could speak again, the doorbell rang. The sound moved through the house cleanly like a spoon tapping glass. Madison looked startled. I folded my hands in my lap. That will be Harold Bennett. Andrew stood halfway. The attorney? Yes. Madison's eyes narrowed. You invited a lawyer to a family dinner? I looked at the paper with the red circled move-out date still visible beside her plate. You invited a realtor. No one answered that. I walked to the front door myself. Harold stood on the porch in a dark overcoat, holding a leather folder against his side. Beside him was Clara, wrapped in a gray wool coat, her white hair pinned neatly, her mouth set in the same firm line Thomas used to have when someone tried to sell him something unnecessary. I let them in without a word. When we returned to the dining room, Madison was standing. Paige was standing too, one hand on her laptop bag. Andrew remained seated, looking smaller than a grown man should look in his childhood home. Harold greeted everyone politely, then placed his folder beside the copy I had already laid out. Clara did not sit. She looked once at Madison, then at Andrew, then at the walnut box on the sideboard. Tommy was right, she said softly. Andrew flinched at his father's childhood name. Harold adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Whitaker asked me to clarify the legal position regarding this property and the Whitaker family irrevocable trust. I will be brief. Madison crossed her arms. This is unnecessary. We were having a private family discussion. Harold looked at her over the top of his glasses. A private family discussion involving a real estate professional, a proposed listing process, a printed relocation schedule, and a request for Mrs. Whitaker's signature. Paige picked up her laptop bag. I think I should go. I think that would be wise, Harold said. Paige apologized to me quietly before leaving. Madison did not look at her. She was watching Harold now with a tightness around her mouth that made her look younger and less certain. Harold opened the folder. The residence at 418 Maple Ridge Drive is held by the trust. Eleanor Whitaker has lifetime residential rights. She cannot be compelled to vacate. She cannot be pressured into sale by beneficiaries. Any attempt to interfere with her possession of the home or her personal legal documents can trigger suspension of beneficiary privileges. He placed another page on the table. Mrs. Whitaker has provided documentation of recent conduct that appears relevant to that clause. Madison's eyes flicked toward me. Documentation. I opened the small notebook I had carried in my purse and set it beside the trust. I did not read from it. I did not need to. Harold had copies. Photographs, he said. Text messages. Voicemails. The transition checklist. The calendar marked move-out target. The unauthorized real estate photographs. The disposal of a personal document box containing trust materials. Andrew closed his eyes. Just once. Madison laughed, but it was thin and dry. This is being exaggerated. I cleaned out clutter. I tried to help an elderly woman make a reasonable plan. Clara finally moved, stepping closer to the table. An elderly woman with a name, a home, and a husband who knew exactly what kind of help might come after he was gone. Madison turned on her. You have no idea what it has been like trying to manage this situation. Clara's voice stayed low. This is not a situation. This is Eleanor's life. Andrew put both hands on the table. Madison, stop. It was the first useful thing he had said in days, maybe months. Madison stared at him as if betrayal had suddenly become real only because it was happening to her. You are taking her side? Andrew looked at the trust papers, then at me. His face looked tired and ashamed. I do not think I knew what side I was on. I wanted to feel relief. Instead, I felt the old ache of a mother realizing her son had needed legal paper to recognize her humanity. Harold continued, professional and calm. Effective immediately, I will be initiating a formal review of the beneficiary conduct issue. Until that review concludes, discretionary distributions connected to Andrew Whitaker's beneficiary interest are suspended. Madison's face went still. Not sad. Not sorry. Calculating. You cannot do that. Harold closed the folder. The trust can. Your father-in-law made sure of it. She looked at Andrew then, and for the first time all night, her expression had no sweetness left. Say something. Andrew swallowed. What do you want me to say? Tell them this is a misunderstanding. He looked down at the red-circled calendar. Is it? That one question changed the air. Madison's mouth opened, then closed. She had words for controlling me. Words for guiding Andrew. Words for making cruelty sound responsible. But she had no words for the truth sitting in plain sight. I picked up the pen she had placed beside the permission form and set it gently on top of her own folder. I will not be signing this, I said. Not tonight. Not ever. Harold gathered the papers, leaving me the copy Thomas had wanted me to have. Clara rested one hand lightly on my shoulder. Andrew looked at that gesture like he was seeing family from the outside for the first time. Madison pushed her chair back. The sound scraped across the floor, ugly and brief. You planned this, she said to me. I looked at the walnut box, then back at her. No, Madison. Your behavior did. Madison left the dining room without clearing her plate. That was how I knew she was truly upset. She had always cared about appearances, even when kindness itself was only part of the arrangement, but that night she pushed her chair in too hard, picked up her purse, and walked toward the front door with Andrew following 2 steps behind her. For a moment I thought he would go with her. Some old part of me still expected him to choose the louder voice, the sharper plan, the easier road. He stopped in the hallway instead. Madison turned back, her hand on the doorknob. Andrew, she said, not as a request but as an order. He looked at me, then at the walnut box on the sideboard, then at the floor, where he had tracked muddy little footprints as a child and I had wiped them away while pretending to scold him. I need a minute, he said. Madison's face hardened. Of course you do. The door closed behind her with a clean final sound. Not a slam. Madison was too controlled for that. But the house felt different after she stepped outside. Lighter somehow, as if a window had opened in a room no one realized had been airless. Harold gathered the documents into his folder and told me he would call in the morning. Clara kissed my cheek and squeezed my hand, her fingers cool and strong. Tommy would be proud, she whispered. I watched them leave from the porch. Madison was sitting in the passenger seat of her car under the driveway light, staring straight ahead. Andrew stood beside the dining room table when I came back inside. The permission form was still there. The red-circled calendar. Page's forgotten business card. The soup bowls. The remains of cornbread on a plate. Ordinary things after an extraordinary betrayal always look strange, as if they have not caught up with what happened around them. Andrew picked up the calendar and stared at the words "Move Out Target." His mouth tightened. I did not know she wrote it like that, he said. I folded my napkin. But you knew. There was a target. He closed his eyes. I did not comfort him. That was new for me. A mother spends so many years rushing toward every wound that she sometimes forgets a grown man must learn to feel pain without being rescued from it. Mom, he said quietly, I am sorry. I looked at him for a long time. His hair was beginning to gray at the temples. Thomas had grayed the same way. It hurt to see the resemblance and the difference at once. Sorry is the beginning, I said. It is not a repair. He nodded. For once he did not argue. He did not blame stress or Madison or timing or misunderstandings. He only sat down slowly in the chair across from me, the chair where Thomas used to sit on Sunday nights with the newspaper spread open and his glasses low on his nose. Andrew looked smaller there. What happens now? He asked. I looked toward the front window. Madison's car lights came on, then back down the driveway and disappeared into the dark. Now, I said, I decide what happens in my house. The next week was quiet in a way my home had not been quiet for months. Not empty. Quiet. There is a difference. Harold filed the formal notice. The trust review began. Page sent a written apology and confirmed she would not proceed with any real estate activity. Madison did not call me, but she sent Andrew plenty of messages. I knew because he stopped hiding his phone and started looking ashamed every time it lit up. I did not ask to read them. I did not need to. By Wednesday, a locksmith came and changed the back door lock, the side door lock, and the lock on Thomas's study. I stood beside him with a cup of coffee while he worked. Lost your keys? He asked casually. I looked at the old brass key in my palm. Something like that. When he left, I placed the new keys in the blue ceramic dish by the door. Only 2. One for me. One sealed in an envelope for Harold. Andrew noticed. He did not ask for one. That was the first wise thing he did without being told. On Friday, Clara came over with chicken salad sandwiches and a pound cake from the bakery downtown. We put the pale blue curtains back up in the front room. We brought Thomas's fishing rods up from the basement. We returned my rocking chair to the sunroom, exactly where the afternoon light touched the armrest. Clara found our wedding photograph still wrapped in newspaper beside a box of old extension cords. She peeled the tape carefully, smoothing the paper away from our faces. There you are, she said. I held the frame against my sweater for a moment before setting it back on the mantel. Thomas looked young in the picture. So did I. But for the first time in a long while, I did not envy that younger woman. She had loved deeply, yes. But she had not yet learned how strong she would become. Andrew came by Sunday afternoon alone. He stood on the porch holding a paper grocery bag with apples, coffee, and the cinnamon cookies I used to buy when he came home from college. His apology that day was not polished. It was not enough. But it was honest. He told me he had let Madison speak because it was easier than disappointing her. He told me he had confused peace with silence. He told me he was ashamed that his father had seen his weakness before he did. I listened. I did not interrupt. When he finished, I said, "You may visit me as my son. You may not manage me as your problem." His eyes filled, but he nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he said, the way he had when he was 12 and knew I meant every word. Madison never stepped inside my home again. Harold made certain she had no role, no access, no voice in the trust. Whether Andrew stayed married to her was his life to sort through, not mine. That was another lesson I learned late. You can love your child without carrying every consequence of his choices. A month after the dinner, the maple tree dropped the last of its leaves, and the first snow dusted the yard before Thanksgiving. I made coffee before sunrise and carried the walnut box into the front room. I placed it on the mantel beneath our wedding photograph, not hidden in a closet, not wrapped in a pillowcase, not treated like something too painful to touch. The wood had a faint stain on one corner from the rain the day Madison threw it out. I left it there. Some marks deserve to remain. They tell the truth better than polished surfaces ever could. I stood in the quiet house with my hands around my warm mug and looked at the rooms Thomas and I had built a life inside. The curtains were back. The chair was back. The photographs were back. But I was not the same woman who had watched her son wrap her marriage in newspaper. I had been hurt. I had been underestimated. I had been spoken about as if age had made me invisible. But I was still here. Madison thought she was throwing away my past. What she really threw away was her future. And I finally understood what Thomas had tried to tell me. A home is not protected by walls alone. Sometimes it is protected by the moment an old woman stops asking permission to stand her ground.